Hey, hello everyone. My name is Victor Williams. I'm a retired federal agent with Homeland Security. In the last 8 years of my career, I worked human trafficking, which has changed my life. Man, I really want to thank you guys for joining us today for this most important information. In my opinion, culture is everything. Culture is driving this, and we're going to try to make this show really educational information that you use, not just something that you hear about. This is going to be, I really want this to relate to you, information that you can identify with and act on. So, as my first show, I can't thank anybody but the best of two people that I love that even helped us putting this together. My first show would be with Oliva from Motivational Missions at BOA Studios. Thank you for being here. And my first, guest.
BOA always gets people.
I know.
But it's actually BOA.
BOA.
BOWA. Be one with
I see
another.
it. I'm looking at it. I still want to say BOA for some reason. BOA. It's going to take me a minute because this is all new. I just told her I'm very nervous. It's not the first time I did a podcast, but it's the first time I have my own show. This is exciting, and I want to thank you and our great husband, Bert, that's off camera, but he's the behind-the-scenes guy that's making all this happen. I can't thank you guys enough for wanting to do this project with me.
Well, you're very special to us, Victor. And so this is our way of not just giving back to you as a very good friend of ours, but also giving back to our community and to our nation. So thank you for having me here.
Well, no, I know you guys have worked many years at, trying to give back to communities all over the world. And when I met you guys years ago, you jumped right in and we did a few things together. And I'm just happy that we're here again working together. And I hope we can change the world like you guys have done wherever you've gone and done your work. So let's do this. Tell us a little bit about what you guys been doing and what you do now.
Well, Motivational Missions is a 501c3 nonprofit. And basically what we do is we address social issues around the world. But the social issue we're most informed of and been involved with is the prevention of human trafficking. And that's exactly how we met. Mm-hmm. So we do it through assemblies, through inspiring leaders in the communities, and we have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've eaten fire before, people hanging out with these guys. So yeah, they keep it very interesting. I hope to get to that level someday as the magical Bert, have people doing weird things, bending bars with their necks. And anyway, we'll talk about that later. So where are we going with this? Where do you guys, you've done a lot of good work. I have to say we're in this amazing, because back in the day you were working out of the studio, out of your house. Now you have this amazing facility that can not only produce good podcasts, it can produce a lot of things in media. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, BOA Studios is definitely a creative playground. It's for people to do podcasts, music videos, photography, all types of videography, all kinds of projects. We've been doing video for decades, almost 3 decades now, doing commercials, everything. We're involved with everything video. But the division of Motivational Missions for us, which is our nonprofit arm, the reason we have the studio is because it will also be hosting programs to teach children how to develop the podcast, how to teach children to do the videos, and of course, staying in the lane of the PSAs. Mm-hmm. So we want to create those PSAs that are going to give communities the information on prevention, awareness, and help.
That's awesome. I know prior to this, we were talking about a few things that you really wanted to stress, and I think is really important for corporations. Can you talk about CSR?
Of course. CSR is corporate social responsibility. A lot of global brands have divisions where they contribute to 501s, nonprofit organizations, where they have programs for their employees to volunteer or to be involved in community relations. And some companies that are up and coming now, because, companies are always shifting, going up and down, they really are not involved in that division and producing that division. And that's what we want to get involved with. We want to let them know that they can use nonprofit organizations to reach out and get strong messages out into their communities. And it also, yes, it's another way of marketing for them. It's a way of writing off taxes for them, yes. But it's also a way of protecting their reputation within their community and the people that buy their products and services. So it's very important to get involved with a program like that if you don't have one established already.
Yeah, and I think, and not just saying this because I'm working with you guys, but because of what you guys do here and the different, rooms that you can shoot film or whatever to bring awareness, I think you would be a great partner for anybody doing this. Any particular organizations you have in mind that you would like to work with?
Well, because I'm a Miamian, I definitely care about my South Florida community. So any company that has a budget that they feel that they can contribute to their community in helping us sponsor the awareness rallies that we have, the assemblies in the schools or for the communities, that's always a bonus for us, because if we get funded, there's more schools, more children, more families, more people that will know about all the awareness that we're raising, particularly in the human trafficking aspect, because that's where our heart lies in there. But we also raise awareness on prevention of bullying and also sexual assault. And, part of myself and part of my team and my co-founder, we're all certified in these different divisions.
Oh, that's good stuff. A lot of people don't know that 1 in 3 or 1 in 4? I think it's 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted in America, and it doesn't go reported.
Yes.
Right?
Because it's embarrassing.
It's you know what
degrading.
It is? It's culture. It's how we've allowed ourselves to develop to treat victims of this, how we question them. Some of the same stuff we deal with human trafficking victims, why they may not want to come forward because they may feel bad about it. They can see wow, how did I let myself get into this? But the community and our culture isn't opening arms, we understand, come in. We're blaming victims for being victimized. That's ridiculous. And that's part of our culture. And that's what I want to talk about, with the show. Some of the things we do, we don't even realize it. And I'm going to be the first to throw myself under the bus because I grew up as a male in America. I grew up, how I thought about women and certain things that was cool to do and, whatever. And then when I started learning about human trafficking, I realized that, oh my goodness, I got my footprints in this space. But when I look back, it's because I didn't know, I didn't know the culture, and I never put myself in those victims' shoes or somebody's shoes that if that happened to somebody I love, what would I do? And that's where I start all my presentations. I have a list about 6 kids, boys and girls that were victims of human trafficking. And I asked the audience, if they have kids or if they know any kids that they love, and take any of those stories and put your kid or that child that you love in any of those stories and ask yourself.
But, a lot of people ask me when I'm in these presentations around the world, I don't have a child. What do I care? That's not going to affect me anyway. But if you have a neighbor, if you have, if there's any children or any person, and then of course we have the different levels of human trafficking, because people are like, well, okay, the child aspect is gone. I don't really care about children or whatever your perspective is. Yeah. But if you're living and breathing, you have organs that they want also.
Well, yeah, that's another aspect that we don't really deal with a lot of that in the U.S. yet, but I know is happening a lot in Europe. But getting back to that point, if that is happening to someone, and I agree, even if you don't have a kid, that's why I asked, do you know any kids that you love, So if that's happening, what would you want your community to know? What would you want the police to know about human trafficking? And what would you want your government to be doing to protect you? The problem with this is so culturally based. Some of these actions are so culturally founded and part of our foundation and things that we do that we don't even think that we're part of the problem. Ladies and gentlemen that are listening to this show, including my friends that are in this room right now, and including myself, we're all part of the problem. We talk a lot about sex trafficking. So I don't do strip clubs anymore. There's a lot of things I don't do in that area, but we don't ever talk about labor trafficking. If I'm buying products from slave labor, whether I know it or not, we're all part of the problem. And that's where we kind of like,
Chocolates, diamonds.
Just be realistic. Like, imagine a world that not only maybe you'll save more money, but if you put more thought in the products that you're buying, nobody wants to wear a shirt, no matter how great it looks, if it came from some child that was beaten and forced to make it. I don't care how good, I wouldn't want it. So when we look at labor trafficking, that's where we can all like come together and understand, yeah, we're all part of the problem, but sex definitely sticks out more in that area, especially kids. And you said something earlier about protecting adults. I always say this: if we can't protect our kids, what hopes do the adults that are caught up in this area have? We're struggling. We just had states recently pass laws. And just to go back, and you guys let me know where because I want to go back and do a little history of human trafficking. How do we got here? So just to go back and understand, how did we get here? Human trafficking, people being exploited has all probably been part of life since life started and people started coming together. But our laws only started in the year 2000. Those were the first human trafficking laws to hit the books. It was done by the Trafficking Victims Act, the TVPA, right, of 2000. Even when I found out back in 2010, when I first started getting in here, I'm like, wow, the law's only been out 10 years. Like, really? Like this heinous crime, we just starting to get laws for it. But it took about 2012 before the country itself started saying, wait a minute, we got a human trafficking problem, because initially
I didn't even know. And that's
Right.
basically when we met was 2012, 2013.
Yeah.
And you came to the Miami Beach Chamber of Commerce
Exactly, yeah.
and you gave that presentation to us, the leadership there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, really? Miami's number 3? And children from ages of 12 to 14, they're the primary target for this stuff. And I was in shock. Remember? And that's when I walked up to you and I said, what are people doing about this? Is anybody teaching their children? Because you're teaching me, but I'm going to go home and my children are not going to believe me.
Right.
And you said, there's no funding.
Yeah. Well,
And you said, if you start it up, I got your back.
yeah, like as an agent, I did a lot of work on the government's, my regular salary. I worked Saturdays, I worked Sundays. I never said no to anybody that asked me to do a presentation or to talk about this, because I was learning myself, right? But when you look back at the year 2000, when these laws came on books, it was the United Nations invited. They had they were in Italy. And the United Nations charged all countries to deal with human trafficking from the 3 Ps: protection, prevention, and prosecution. If you go to the State Department TIPS report, they do an annual report of every country. And every country is
They're rated.
They're rated
Yeah.
from a tier 1 to a tier 3. Tier 1 is that you're addressing all the 3 Ps. Tier 2, you might be only addressing 2 of them. Like prosecution have always been an issue for different countries to charge people with this, because their laws really weren't set up for it. So once they changed their laws and started educating people, they were considered maybe a tier 2 or a tier 2 watch list. But then tier 3, your country may be part of the problem. The culture of the country may be so. It grew up exploiting people. That's how you get away.
I've been to tier 3 countries and addressed these issues.
And so if you can't get leadership to understand it, we're fighting that fight harder. If I can get the country to understand, and that's what we're doing here. I've talked to politicians. I've talked to people, law enforcement. I've talked to a lot of people over my time in doing this. At the end of the day, when these leaders don't get it, it makes the people that do get it job a lot harder. Because
But the problem in some of these tier 3 countries, because we did a tour in a tier 3 country a couple years ago, and the problem is that the politicians are involved in that. So we had death threats after we left that country because they were saying that we're dipping into their pockets.
Exactly.
So there were death threats on our group because we were raising awareness in that country.
Yeah.
And so that there becomes the problem where sometimes they're like, you know what, I'm getting personal money in my pocket. What do I care if I'm getting sanctioned or not getting money from over here because that's going to the country, but this one's coming to my pocket.
Right. Right.
So there lies another huge problem in this.
Culture. Money is part of that too.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's all about money when it comes to sex trafficking or any type of trafficking. You smeared your lipstick. It's going like this now on the other side. No, on this side. Anyway, so no, but it's always been about money, and people don't understand that, you know. And your leadership you're right. Sometimes your leaders are part of the problem, and that's what I'm saying. If leadership don't get it, it's harder to fight those battles. It doesn't mean that they can't be fought. It's just harder to fight them. When I worked for Homeland Security, and I promise you guys I would be 100% honest. If we ever get to a Q&A section of this show, I would be 100% honest with you because I don't think we can move forward without facts of, you know, what we know. And so I left a little early my career with HSI because not that they didn't get it and they're not one of the best agencies in fighting this, but my job was to go out in the community every day. So every day I was learning something different and I was growing and I was adjusting to that, and I would come back and tell my bosses. But when you're not in that environment, it's still harder for you to get that. I tell law enforcement agencies when I'm working with them, I need 2 people to be 100% dedicated to human trafficking. And all I need is 2 because it takes 2. I mean, I've been doing this for 12 years now, and I mean, you never stop learning, but I can't imagine being focused on doing something at what my rate of understanding this would be. I'm still learning and still adjusting my life to what I learned based on this stuff. And so imagine if I had 100 other things to do. And that's how I see politicians. They got 100 issues. And human trafficking is one of them. How do they give, you know, the attention that these issues need? So hopefully they hire experts that can say, hey, boss, this is the truth, what's going on here, and this is what we need, right? That's how I felt.
That's why we started Motivational Missions, because we knew that the government itself, that the teachers and the school administrators and all that weren't doing this back in 2012, 2013 when we got involved. I approached even the Department of Education. They told me that it had to be at a state level or a local level to talk to them. And I was like, but I'm going straight to the top. Are you kidding me? Yeah. We need to do something. I wrote politicians, approached everybody because we wanted to get these programs in these assemblies in the schools. Because it's different when you have an outsider coming in and teaching them and stopping their regular flow of productivity in the day. Yeah. It sets a message in the children's brain. And we know this. So we did it with music and games and interactive teachings. And then we inject to them the importance of the other things that they need. But they need the skills of leadership and empowerment. And so we approach the schools that way to trigger that into the community and to trigger it into the students' minds that they know this.
Yeah, which is great because you're building people. Yeah. And strong people 99% of the time don't become a victim.
They deflect that danger.
They know how to understand. They know what to do. They know how to get out of things, or they see it coming before it had, they're trusting their instincts. That's what we tell them.
We're activating your spidey senses,
Exactly, exactly. Because, when we talk about the beginnings and understanding, and one of the things I wanted to do in this first show is really define what human trafficking is so we understand it and where it comes from and there.
Well, tell us,
it's so much.
Where does it come from?
So first of all, to understand the laws of human trafficking, you need 3 words: force, fraud, or coercion. Those are the 3 elements of human trafficking. You need one of them to have a human trafficking case. Fortunately, exploitation, which is what this is really about, is not a crime federally. Some states have made it exploitation that element, which is great. But you need one of those 3 elements to have a human trafficking case. When it comes to sex trafficking, if you're under the age of 18, I don't need any of those elements. That means when that law came out into the year 2000, any young person under the age of 18 that was being prostituted or commercially sexually exploited, they were victims. There's no such thing as child prostitution. They were victims, but because of culture, we couldn't see that. Even when the law came out, it took the state of Florida 16 years to finally pass no more arresting children for human trafficking. The state of Georgia, where I recently had a job with them last year as the human trafficking coordinator of the state, I learned a lot, worked with amazing people. And right now they are doing an amazing work from a state perspective. We're dealing with it from regional. It was great learning from the state perspective, right? They didn't pass that law until 2019, you know?
And they're one of the biggest
Well, Atlanta
spots,
is one of the
yeah.
biggest cities. But they're doing great work. But how do I convince? And these people that I work with know it better than me. They know this stuff. They worked in it all their lives. I did it for 12 years. They've been working with people and things like that. But if I can't convince that governor, that senator, that congressman, that we need funding to fund this program, all we're doing is just trying to educate. That's how I felt with Homeland. I was just going around neighborhoods and community, just, hey, this is it. But no real funding, no real advertising. So, and in that definition, if you transport somebody, if you put somebody in your home, anything that you connect to that person being trafficked using one of those 3 elements, that you can be charged with human trafficking. So I always make it short. Those 3 elements are very important.
Repeat those 3 elements so that are
force, fraud, and coercion. Force, obviously, I beat you to make you do what I want you to do. Coercion is the threat of hurting you or somebody. You just saw me beat up, you're next unless you do what I tell you to do. Coercion. And then fraud, which is one of the weakest of the elements, because what does that say? I get you to come down to Miami because I want you to work in my studio as a receptionist. But when you get here, usually by force or coercion, I have you selling yourself. And we've had a case like that. We'll talk about some past cases in these segments, but we had a case like that. So that's kind of like the definition. It's a rough, country ghetto type definition because it's the first show and I'm not reading it. I'm giving it from the heart. But where does this start? I always tell people human trafficking starts at home. Why does it start at home? Because in your earliest years of experienced trauma, probably started at home. And if it went unresolved, it leaves you vulnerable. And traffickers are masters at
Could you give us an example of what a trauma that maybe you came across?
Okay, say your kid goldfish died, and you're like, oh man, you throw the goldfish down and it'd be all right. Meanwhile, you're not helping that child deal with that loss. That could have been the first thing that they really love or thought they love, and now they're lost. And this is how we treat people. Things that we love. We just,
toss it.
We didn't have the conversation about death. We didn't have the conversation about, well, babe, sometimes people gonna die. Maybe they're not at that age, but we go to sleep for a long time, and then there's a process. Maybe we go to heaven. Maybe wherever you tell them, but you have to help. You just can't write it off. It could be the same with a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Oh, I love that girl. That's their moment. And we know that, yeah, you're going to brush it off down the road, but we know.
But while they're living it, it's the biggest thing in their lives.
And we got to help them process it, right? Loss. whether it's losing that boyfriend, losing that fish, losing that dog, that's a trauma. The obvious stuff is, yeah, when you're getting beaten as a kid or sexually, assaulted as a kid or verbal abuse as a kid. One of the leading things that drove this trauma in the children when I retired in 2018, one of the leading things at that time was arguments that parents were having in front of kids, right? Mm-hmm. And it's that abusive language, that bad language. And then this kid
becomes acceptable now in their head.
Well, it depends on how many years you go through it, but I want you to picture this poor kid. Listen to mom and dad argue and fight and threaten each other or maybe hit each other, but they're screaming and this kid don't know what's going on. That's trauma.
Yeah.
And we blow it off like, oh, they'll get over it. Yeah, but to what extent? Our culture is so crazy that we don't recognize how much it leads us in our conversations and our thoughts. And I spend so much time making sure that, I'm really doing or whatever from facts and honestly, not for something that I believe that should be right or should have been right. But family, if you think about pretty much all the world ills, hungry, homeless, all these different things, this stuff started at home. It starts at home. The trafficker, everybody hates the trafficker. But what happened to that human being to treat another human being that way? You want to know what family he came from? The same family. What trauma was that person going through and nobody ever resolved it or checked it, or he just rolled through?
Well, that's one of the things that we learned, that most victimizers were victims of some trauma early on in their lives. And that's why we need to, when we get them out, we need to pay attention to them and heal them and reincorporate them into feeling safe in their communities and everything. So everybody needs to have their trauma resolved. Yes.
And with this, in this show, we will have experts to better explain what I tell you, it was a funny thing. I was feeling this for a long time early in my career, but I couldn't put words on it. Why are people doing this? What happened? What happened? And then I had someone do a trauma class, and I go, oh, that's what it is, right? And so you kind of like start understanding trauma is everything. And I'll end with this. If the world was a perfect place, every country would make children and family their priority. Because if they're going to lead us in the future, we want to give them the best support of, when they walk out the door to go to college, we want them confident, feeling good, feeling safe, so when they walk out in the world, they're productive, they're caring, they're looking out for each other. We're going in so many different directions in our world right now because we stopped caring about each other. But families, rich or poor, need professional help sometimes to deal with their issues.
Absolutely.
Back in the day, it was always said, well, there ain't no book. We don't have a book about how to raise a kid. Well, there are plenty of them now, so that's not an excuse anymore. But imagine,
their local hospital didn't give them the manual.
Exactly. But imagine if every country made family and children truly their priority, where the world would be and where we would be. So on that note, I'm going to end because I could keep talking about this forever. I don't know how we're dividing this show up or what, but I just want to end by, man, you know what? I was so nervous. Thank you guys so much for even loving me this much to want to do this with me. I'm excited and, I look forward to doing this in the future.
Well, thank you for being brave enough to come here and do it. But I mean, if you can jump out of a helicopter, in a plane, you can definitely sit in a podcast chair and give us all that wonderful information that you have in your heart. Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm going to give every day. And I hope to invite people here that take us a little deeper into these different things that creates this problem, so that when you go out to deal with your family, your children, your community, you're more educated and aware and make better decisions on how to address things when these things come up, because they're going to come up. It's part of our culture.
Yeah,
they're probably already there. The question is, are you seeing it and dealing with it properly?
What are you doing about it?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. You want to give us a sign off?
Yeah, that's red. Hey, okay. Yeah, guys, thanks again for this opportunity. I look forward to doing more shows, educating myself, educating you. And you reminded me of a question that I always say to I ask my audience after doing a presentation. You guys only got a little bit of the information, but what you learned today, what are you going to do about it? Thank you, and see you next week.